Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn on the Education Research Briefs. I'm Anna Hunt from QUESCREN, so Quebec English Speaking Communities Research Network, and I'm just going to be doing some of the tech assistance for today. So before we begin, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. So whilst we continue still to meet on a virtual platform, Concordia University, myself, QUESCREN, many of us here today are nevertheless located on unceded Indigenous lands. So Gunyaka Haga Nation is recognized as the custodians of these lands and waters, and Tiohtià:ke, Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many, many First Nations, and today is home to a diverse population of both Indigenous and other peoples. I just want to stress that we at QUESCREN at Concordia, we continue to respect the continued connections with the past, the present, and the future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community and beyond. So now, before I pass you over to the real stars of this event, I first just want to quickly thank our funders. So the Secretariat en relation avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise, the Department of Canadian Heritage, and the Canadian Institute for Research on Linguistic Minorities. And now it is my genuine pleasure to pass you over to Debbie Horrocks, our moderator for today. So Debbie is the director of the Provincial Resource Team at CLC Network at Learn Quebec.
Hi, thanks Anna, and hi everyone. As Anna said, I'm Debbie Horrocks, I'm at Learn. I'm also a member of the ILET table. ILET is the Interlevel Educational Table, and is made up of representatives from Quebec's English language educational institutions, along with a variety of community organizations, and we also have representation from the public sector. ILET's mandate is to support Quebec's English-speaking education system through research, knowledge mobilization, and educational activities. In 2018, ILET conducted a survey to identify priority research topics, and the briefs being presented today focus on some of those priority issues and challenges within Quebec's English language education sector. We only have an hour today, so to ensure we get through the presentation and have time for questions at the end, I'd like to now introduce William Flock, the Assistant Secretary for the Secretariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise, to say a few words. Hey, Bill.
Thank you, Debbie. And thanks again to QUESCREN for organizing this event and for having undertaken the various research projects you've undertaken. I'm going to be very quick because I'm like you, I'm eager to hear more about the presentations and the research. But I'll just say that from the Secretariat's point of view, as some of you know, we're a relatively new organization in the government of Quebec, formed in late in 2017. We've got a very ambitious mandate. One of the parts of our mandate is to produce and disseminate research about English-speaking Quebecers. Being a small team, having many, many challenges, we found that one of the ways we can work towards our mandate in that regard is to work closely with an organization like QUESCREN. And I would say that we're very, very happy with the kind of collaboration we've had. We've had a number of funding agreements with QUESCREN. I think their capacity to bring together people from the public sector, from the university setting, and from the community and institutional sector is a real strength, and one that we're very, very pleased to be able to draw on. As was mentioned in the introduction, the Interlevel Education Table, at which we now sit as an observer, has played an important role in articulating a number of areas where further research, building of evidence base could be useful to English-speaking communities, and frankly to government, to other players as well. So for all of the foregoing, we're very pleased to have supported the work that QUESCREN's been carrying out with its affiliated researchers, and we look forward to the findings that are going to be shared with us today, and also then encouraging other players in the government of Quebec and perhaps even the other levels of government to take note of the research that's emerging and to build the best possible public policy using that research. So that's really what I want to say as a preamble, and like you, I'm eager to hear what the researchers have come up with. So back to you.
Great, thanks, Bill. So now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. Firstly, we have Nadine Ciamarra. She's a research assistant for this ongoing QUESCREN project. She works as a learning experience designer at Knowledge 1/eConcordia and previously taught English as a second language. She holds a master's degree in applied linguistics and a graduate diploma in instructional technology from Concordia University. Her research interests revolve around bilingualism, multilingualism, language and cultural identity, and information and communication technology in education. Our second presenter is Patricia Lamarre. Patricia is a professor at the University of Montreal, and as a sociolinguist, her research focuses on the changing language context within Quebec. More specifically, she's conducted studies and published on the bilingual and plurilingual practices of young Montrealers, the quest for bilingualism among Quebec's Anglophone community, and the implementation of the Community Learning Centers, or CLCs, which is an innovative approach to community schooling in the English school sector of Quebec. Without further ado, Nadine and Patricia, I'm handing it off to you.
Hello, everyone. I'll just take a moment to share my screen. So welcome to our presentation on QUESCREN's education research briefs. In today's presentation, we will explain how the series came about by providing information on the priority research topics, the final deliverables, key findings from each of the briefs, and finally some concluding remarks for future research. These briefs focus on priority issues and challenges within QUESCREN's English language education sector, as identified by QUESCREN's interlevel educational table, or ILET. QUESCREN had the mandate to produce 2 reports on priority research topics identified by ILET members, and we conducted a needs analysis to narrow down the topics of interest and determine what format these reports should have. And then we researched the topics and wrote the briefs. I will explain this process in detail in the following slides. The process involved creating a list of potential research topics, sending a survey to ILET members to ask them to rank their priority research topics, asking ILET members about the preferred format for the reports, interviewing a few ILET members to collect information on the subtopics, and then narrowing down the list of topics. This list was further narrowed down when we realized that there was too little existing information to write a brief on some of the subtopics. At a QUESCREN meeting, I presented the ILET members with format options for the reports, asking them which solutions would be of most use to them in their organization. And based on the feedback received, bibliographic Excel documents and short briefs containing both statistics and infographics were chosen. The creation and review process of these documents was cyclical. The documents were written by myself and Patricia Lamarre, with some early contributions from Angelica Restrepo. So the documents were reviewed by a few external reviewers who are members of ILET. And finally, Lorraine and Patrick reviewed and edited all the documents before they were sent to the Secretariat for feedback and validation. The final deliverables we created included 3 Excel documents and 8 2- to 3-pager briefs. So we'll go over each one of the briefs in the following slides. To briefly show you an example of what the bibliographic Excels look like, you can see that it contains the reference, the web link, and an abstract when available. Brief number 1 looks at the decline of enrollment in Quebec's English language school sector. Since the early 1970s, the decline of the English language school population has been over twice as pronounced as that of the French language sector, a decline of 61.3% versus 28.8%. The main challenge in enrollment in primary and secondary public schools. So from 2005-2006 to 2019-2020, the English language school enrollments have decreased by 18.2%, but increased by 2.7% in the French language schools. And beyond the educational clauses of Quebec's charter, other factors have contributed to the declining number in student enrollment. These include outmigration of Anglophone families and youth to the growing trend of Anglophone crossover to the French language schools. This declining enrollment contributes to diminishing educational services and resources across the English language school sector, and this impacts particularly what small schools can provide. Brief number 2 looks at the representation of English speakers in Quebec's education ministries and curriculum development. In Quebec's public service in 2019, 506 out of 53,570 regular employees, or 0.9%, were Anglophones, roughly 1/10 of their proportion in the total population of the province. In early 2020, only 1.9% of the total regular employees were Anglophone in what was then a single education ministry called Ministère de l'Éducation et de l'Enseignement Supérieur. Given that Quebec's English-speaking community no longer has an educational services sector of its own within MEES, its voice is diminished, potentially reducing its influence on decisions impacting educational policy, as well as on program and curriculum development. So the loss of regional offices, new hiring policies, intra-government transfers, and rigorous standards for French language proficiency seem to have contributed to the decreased numbers of English-speaking representatives in the ministry. The Advisory Board on English Education recommends that the Assistant Deputy Minister's role be refocused on the English sector and on English language education, and highlights the importance of having strong leadership at the ministry so that the ADM and his or her department can be involved early on in decision-making stages relating to policy and curriculum changes. Brief number 3 looks at challenges around resources and services in Quebec's English language schools. These schools struggle with a range of diverse challenges and are in need of additional funding. Many small schools are located in isolated and remote areas, but schools with small student populations can also be found in rural, semi-rural, and even in some urban settings. And these schools can be at risk of closures, mergers, or transfers. They also have less per capita funding to offer programs and options. In 2020, in the Montreal region, 31.9% of public elementary schools and 38.7% of public secondary schools had a student population from low socioeconomic neighborhoods. To meet the needs of marginalized or underprivileged students, initiatives like the New Approaches, New Solutions program have been implemented, along with other initiatives undertaken by the community language centers. With the inclusive education model favored in English language schools, students with special needs are for the most part being integrated into regular classrooms. So for 2015-2016, this was 88%. And there are extra costs associated with the support services needed, which are not sufficiently funded. English language schools must deal with problems that face all schools, but with the added challenges of preparing English-speaking students for life in a French Quebec, as well as promote the culture and vitality of the official language minority. Brief number 4 looks at the provision of services to special needs students in Quebec's English language public schools. The increase of special needs students in English language schools has been especially significant despite a greater decline of the total student population of these schools, So from 2001 to 2016, there was an increase of 122.3% of students with special needs, which is a much higher increase than in the French language schools. And the rate of integration, as mentioned, of special needs students into regular classes throughout the years has been consistently higher in English language schools than in the French language schools. So 88.1% for English language schools and 72.5% for French language schools. This integration comes with many challenges and costs. There are not enough professional resources for special needs students, and teachers do not always have the adequate training to deal with children in difficulty. There is a need for stronger support system for students with special needs in the English language public schools. Collaboration and assistance should come from organizations in early childhood educational services and health and social services, like those that are emerging through the CHSSN and community school partnerships, which we will be talking about in brief number 8 in a later slide. So help is needed not only with the assessment and diagnosis of special needs students, but with the promotion of early intervention and support services. So this is true for the whole public school system, but even more so in the English language public education sector. Brief number 5 focuses on the demography of Quebec's English language schools, complexity, changes, and community issues. So Quebec's English-speaking community is demographically complex, and the backgrounds of students in English language schools are also diverse and evolving. The rate of bilingualism is also on the rise. When we look at the English Montreal School Board and the Lester B. Pearson School Board on the island of Montreal, in 2019, around half of the students had at least one parent born outside Quebec. This is even higher in the French sector. Over a third of students do not have English as their mother tongue. There is also an important number of French first language students in the English schools, and many children being raised bilingually or trilingually. There is also an increasing number of English-speaking families sending their children to French language schools in an effort to help kids acquire high-level bilingual skills. In 2015, 11.3% of students with the constitutional right to attend an English language school attended a French language school. And this is up from 9.5% in 1991. So all of these complex changing realities give rise to important discussions within the English-speaking community about the role of its English language schools, as they have a role to play as a primary institution in linguistic and cultural OLM community reproduction and in promoting OLM community vitality. They must do so while preparing students for life in an increasingly diverse Quebec, and while recognizing the diverse backgrounds of all students in the sector. Brief number 6 looks at issues of bilingual education in Quebec's English language schools. The rate of bilingualism is on the rise in the province overall. In 2016, bilingualism was highest among youth, around 65% for the 20 to 29-year-olds, with Anglophones becoming bilingual at a younger age than Francophones. In 2016, the language spoken mostly at work in Quebec was French at 80%, followed by English at 12%, while 7% of workplaces reported equal use of both languages. Parents want their children to be proficient in French to access career opportunities in Quebec and hope that this will allow youth to stay in the province after they graduate. This has put pressure on the English sector to provide bilingual programs such as French immersion. But some parents consider French immersion is not enough, and there is a crossover to French language schools at the primary and increasingly the secondary level. The English sector has the mandate to promote vitality of English-speaking communities and the mandate to ensure strong bilingual skills to students with different home languages. Much more recognition of this is needed if the English sector wants to maintain its student population. ABE argues that schools have to go beyond providing language instruction and provide students with strong skills in biliteracy and bilingualism. To survive and thrive in Quebec's job market today, strong writing skills in both English and French are essential. Brief number 7 looks at the out-migration of Quebec's English-speaking youth. Looking at youth and interprovincial migration, we see that the 15 to 29 age group represented 35.2% of the population that entered and 31.7% that left Quebec in 2019-2020, and that a higher percentage of 20 to 29-year-olds left than entered. There is not much research available, but a study did find that the factors influencing student retention after university graduation consisted in no particular order of job opportunities, friends, a safe place to live, and the cost of living. Unemployment and low income cutoff rates are higher for English-speaking youth than French mother tongue youth. In 2016, among the 15 to 29 age group, 68.2% were living on a low income and 23.6% were living below the low income cutoff. This despite having higher educational levels. So 20.4% of English-speaking youth had a bachelor's degree or higher. Although they are more bilingual and educated than in the past, they not only earn less than their Francophone counterparts, but they also seem to have a harder time finding employment in their field. These are likely among the many factors contributing to why many choose to leave the province to find economic opportunities elsewhere or express their intention to do so. And finally, brief number 8 looks at the community school network in Quebec's official language minority, OLM, educational sector. Support for community schools is provided by Quebec through Entente Canada-Québec funding. The CLCs have the goal of connecting schools more closely to their local communities and of contributing to the vitality of Quebec's English schools and communities. They represent an innovative approach to official minority schooling. Today, there are 92 community schools located in all 10 school boards, representing nearly a third of schools and reaching over a quarter of the student population in the English language sector. A key feature of the CLC approach is the development of partnerships at various levels and between potential collaborators. For example, school teams, parents, local stakeholders, and different levels of governments. Key partners are, for example, the Community Health and Social Services Network, CHSSN, and the English Language Arts Network, ELAN. Partnerships have proven to be mutually beneficial, bringing programs, resources, and services to CLC schools. At the same time as providing partners with a reach into schools and their local communities. Schools and communities are stronger when everyone works together and schools engage in mutually beneficial relationships with community organizations and partners. I will now pass over the mic to Patricia, who will provide a few concluding remarks.
And the first thing I really wanted to do before I get to the concluding remarks was to congratulate Nadine. She was given an ambitious project and she took it on. And it's very hard to be strong in all of these different areas that were identified by ILET. And it was a big piece of work. And I think what we both know at this point is that writing briefs are brief by nature, but getting there is a really long process. And she stuck it through and pulled it off with brio. So I just really wanted to say that. It's been a delight working with you, Nadine. I'd also like to thank quickly Patrick and Lorraine for their collaboration and their leadership in this project, their input and feedback on the briefs as we went through. There were many, many versions of these briefs, and I don't even want to bring up how many because I think my hair would stand straight up. I'd also like to thank the ILET members that provided feedback on different versions and answered questions as we went. I think it'd be very hard to find any academic that would dare say that they were a specialist on this list of topics. I felt that I was quite able in some areas, and other areas we had to simply look at what was there and write the briefs as best we could. Some topics, as Nadine mentioned at the beginning, there simply wasn't enough to write anything that resembled a brief. We would get to a paragraph or two and that was it. And I think this is important to underline here. It's not that these topics weren't worth looking at, but that there simply wasn't enough information to write a brief. So I don't want them to bite the dust and disappear. I think they need to be kept in mind and discussion on why don't we have more information on these topics. I would say looking at all of the topics, I work fairly frequently with people in French minority sections. What has always struck me and strikes me in 2021 again is how under-researched the English sector is. We did not do research to get to these briefs. We looked at what was there, and what was there are huge issues, huge challenges, and insufficient research, insufficient time taken to look at things that are critical in what is actually a very small school sector. So the same lack of resources and lack of power within a small school sector, it does affect what kind of research gets done. So I think what we really have to look at here is the reality of being an official minority language school sector that has a need, a very basic and urgent need for more. What the briefs also brought up where I did identify, and I think quite well, I'm very satisfied with this piece, is there are critical issues and challenges that have been identified, which can help people in this, the type of meeting in ILET decide where they want to put their energies. There's a lot of critical issues and challenges, and that's how I'm going to propose that we shape the discussion for the remaining time, is that we look at these with a broad picture. They were presented very briefly, a very general picture. Nothing was presented in any great depth. And that we look at these, and I'm going to ask whoever's in charge of polling now to send out a polling and to ask people which of these briefs, which of these topics would they like to revisit after having read the briefs, and in an informal type of discussion, look at what can be done. For today, we're going to stay with the general. So there is a poll. You don't have to answer it right away, but as we move through this part of the meeting before we end, which of these briefs would you like us to come back to? Would you like ILET to come back to and look at with you? If somebody could move the slide for me, whoever has got animator power. All right, I'm going to move that sondage. If you look at the briefs, my question for the people today, and it's a very broad question, is where to from here? And when I looked at the 8 briefs, and I did include the community school, I realized that there were some that were harder for educational stakeholders to work on directly. They're out of our range. We can put pressure, we can bring them up, but we can't directly act on them. So the decline of enrollment is, in my opinion, one of them. Outmigration of Quebec's English-speaking youth. These are big things that are happening in society. There's perhaps ideas for how to help keep kids here that teachers can take on, but we don't have a tremendous amount of clout in doing things. The demography, the changing demography of Quebec and the changing demography of Quebec's English language schools. I think these are social factors that we have to recognize and keep in mind at all times, but we have less clout. And one of the topics that didn't appear on the list, in which I am kind of surprised, is the increasing level of poverty in Quebec's English sector school population. That it's not there, for me as an academic, is telling. There is, in my mind, when you look at the stats, it should be, and how come it isn't? So as an academic, it's a question I'm raising today. Why isn't it on there? It is a reality. It is one that we have to deal with. It is one that teachers and other stakeholders are dealing with and working with to the best of their abilities, but we have very little research on its impact, and it wasn't included in the list of things to look at for a brief. Where I think we can have impact is with the ABE, ILIT, other forms of stakeholder regroupings, is on representation of English speakers in Quebec's education ministries. And as somebody, again, who works with colleagues that are dealing with official language minority in other provinces, I think there'd be a lot to learn looking at what's being done to recognize official language minorities in ministries outside of Quebec. These are all my opinions. I'm based on the briefs that I helped work on. The challenges around resources and services, again, areas where we can have a little bit more action and where we can also determine what kind of research we want more quickly. The provision of services to special needs, the issues of bilingual education, the need for bilingualism in the English sector, and the community school network, which I've put here. I was asked to write that little brief. It wasn't on the list, but it was one that I was asked to add. I think here we have an important tool in helping schools build partnerships in a time of declining population, pull in resources, and help counter many of the challenges and issues. So I think I'm very glad that the community school network is included in these briefs. Here's a tool, here's one of the ways. Maybe what I should put in there is also learn the educational network. I'm just realizing now I should have included it there as well in areas where we have tools, but that I'll correct right away by saying it. If we can move to the next slide, I'm going to stop talking and hand it over. We've put on this side, on the left side are the topics of the briefs and the Excel documents. We know it was very brief. It was an overview today, but we'd like to hear your thoughts on what we've presented. And I'm particularly curious to see a lot of this, some of us know or know a bit or suspected or know quite well, but was there anything that surprised you? Where can you see actions that should be taken? Where do you see right away on this very overview, very general overview, a need for future research? And if you have time, please tell us how you think you can use these briefs, and if there are briefs that you think need to be written still.
Maybe I'll just jump in and say, Patricia, in your comments about the sort of the notion that a lot of these topics are important and yet under-researched, I just maybe underline that, well, more years than I care to admit, a number of years ago at Canadian Heritage, we ran a program that supported research for official languages in Canada. So we looked at minority language education, community vitality, second language learning, and linguistic duality. And it was remarkable, but over a 3-year period, with millions of dollars in research money put out there, we had zero uptake from the English language universities in Quebec. So nobody from McGill, Concordia, Bishops proposed anything at all in the area of minority language education. So to me, I would say that what QUESCREN now it's been able to do is to bring together researchers who are now taking up some of these topics. And, you know, that was 15 years ago. It's, you know, here we are now. It's still not perfect, but I think there's been some progress. But I would really suggest that one of the questions that could be raised is, to what extent are the faculties of education at the 3 universities mindful of the role of research and community vitality? And perhaps that's maybe a direct question that could be put to them. So I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, and I'll agree with you 100%, Bill. It's the money is there. There is money for research. Why isn't it taken up? Why aren't there careers in academia being made around research on minority issues? And I've said this before, it's just an opportunity to say it again. There's a lot of chairs in education for French minority educational issues in different provinces. We're long overdue. We need a chair. And I'm at the end of my career. I'm hoping someone young and full of feist will pick it up.
Thanks. Juan Carlos Quintana, you had a question, you had your hand up, or?
Yes, thank you, Debbie and Patricia and Nadine. A very thorough analysis of our reality at the school boards and community schools. I had a question, it's a pseudo-political one. Will there be a press release, you know, outlining the biggest, you know, like aha moments of these research, including the fact that, you know, despite the Anglos being mostly bilingual, they're underemployed and are in the lowest end of the, you know, like revenue spectrum. So that, you know, like that, right now it's a big topic that bilingualism is not the way to go, right? So if there's something going out to the media, so that perhaps, you know, like that topic can somewhat be explored thoroughly and objectively.
Can I step in? Lorraine O'Donnell. Hi. I help coordinate the interlevel educational table. We have a meeting following this meeting, and we're going to be discussing it together. So Debbie and Patricia and others present now will be discussing next steps for the brief. So thanks, Juan Carlos, for your idea.
We have some questions in the chat, but Cindy Finn had a question.
Yes, hi everyone. This is really interesting work, and I really appreciate the overview, and I like the presentation of the 8 briefs together, because you start to see things layering. And my question and comment really is, I would be more interested in delving deeper into this, the finding about there are more and more students with special needs being declared in the Anglophone system, but that term is such a big umbrella term, and I think there's merit to going deeper, because when you start to layer in issues of poverty, and I would argue as someone who works in a school system, very often we are quicker perhaps to try to identify a learning issue which may or may not be indicative of a learning disability, but sometimes it's just a temporary situation, given that most of our students, even in the so-called English system, which is a terrible misnomer, we're really educating bilingual students. And so the question comes, our grade 1 and 2 teachers are saying, I don't know, is the student really struggling because of a language issue, a second language issue, a learning disability? And I think we need to go deeper into understanding what some of those findings are telling us. I also suspect, and I have for a while, that Anglophone youth live certain realities differently perhaps than Francophone or even Allophone youth. When we survey our students, we survey them quite often, and we use a tool that compares our students with all of the English boards use this tool that surveys students on a number of issues, and then we're compared to a Canadian average. I can't speak for the other 9 English school boards, but certainly in our school board, we see our students reporting higher levels of anxiety and depression. And we've often said, is there something about being an Anglophone in Quebec, where you're a minority within a majority that's part of a larger minority in North America? Like, is there something causing our youth more anxiety? And when I see the data about the outmigration and poverty, start to see a bit of a picture, but I would just recommend we look deeper at what some of those data points are telling us, because we don't have a clear story. about why we have higher levels of education, but perhaps more issues, more poverty, more maybe even mental health needs. Anyway, it opens up so many questions. So thank you. You've given me a lot to think about, and perhaps some directions for the future to probe deeper.
Yeah, there's a lot that I actually would say I was often frustrated with the briefs that there was so little explanation that we could put in for the higher number, let's say, of special needs students. I have no, from the information we were able to gather, I can't explain it. You know, I cannot explain why it's so much higher. There's got to be reasons, but it needs, as you proposed, more in-depth work where people really go in and take a look at that issue.
There's no more questions here. We have a couple in the chat.
Okay.
Duncan was wondering if you could mention a couple of the important topics that were brought up, but were not developed because of the lack of research.
Sure. A couple that we dropped were the need for support and opportunities for teachers in Quebec's OLM English schools, the rigidity of the régime pédagogique, and access to technical training and adult education. So those are the ones that we ended up completely dropping from our list. For the one on need for support and opportunities for teachers in Quebec's English schools, yes, we felt that what we found in the research was just not enough to write anything substantial in our briefs.
So we have another question from Shayla Safi. I'm curious whether there is any research related to newly arrived immigrants in Quebec and the impact of this in the English language schools. Many immigrants like myself, who is an Anglophone, are obviously not allowed to send their children to the English language schools.
I don't know of any. Does anyone out there know of any research on that particular topic?
I could say, Bill Block here, that for some of the immigrant population who are in the French language system, we're getting kind of echoes of difficulties that are encountered because the parents may speak English and not French. And when difficulties arise at the school, there's a challenge for communicating between the French language school board and the English speaking parent. But it's anecdotal, but it recurs. We hear that a lot.
And I would say, from what I know from working in a French faculty of education, many schools will realize that they can communicate with those parents in English, and there are practices to help communicate with parents in English when they need to. But again, I don't know of any systematic research on that particular issue. I know of, again, anecdotal that a lot of principals and teachers in the French sector are more concerned with the children and getting across and being able to communicate with the parents. So I don't think there is a refusal to use English with parents that have newly arrived. And I've heard the opposite anecdotally. I was just thinking, one of the topics that was brought up on special ed was the need to be able to diagnose children with special needs from children that are struggling because of bilingualism, they're learning a new language, and also have special needs, and sorting that out. And I do know that that's a major challenge for the French school sector. And there is work being done at the French school boards on helping teachers recognize learning disability and separating it from a language disability, a language challenge, which will disappear over time, whereas the learning disability needs immediate attention. And helping classroom teachers figure that out. So I think there's actually some areas where, as a small school sector, we should be looking and talking to French school boards and saying, where do we have common concerns?
Another question, different level. Is there any research on OLMC adult education, particularly related to literacy levels?
Not in English, not that I know of.
Andrew asks, could be interesting to study the changes introduced in Bill 96 and how they might impact English post-secondary institution.
Definitely. It's definitely an issue and a challenge, but I think Nadine was given a pretty hefty chunk in 2018 This one is another challenge coming, and again, definitely deserves attention. But I think the biggest challenge is figuring out where to focus in all of these issues that are present.
Question for Nadine. What findings surprised you the most?
Well, I think overall the lack of research was surprising. So, you know, at the beginning, when I was asked to write a literature review, I figured, oh, this is easy enough. And then as things progressed and discovered how there is a lack of research, and in some cases it was a bit of a detective work trying to find stats, for example, and having to contact various people to get information. So out of all the briefs, what surprised me the most is the one, brief number 8, with the out-migration of young educated English speakers. You know, just from my own experience and friends leaving the province and reasons for that. So I found that one very interesting, and also not having some of the stats related to that one for really how many English speaking, French speaking youth that leave, and figures relating to that.
Bill, you have a question or a comment on learning challenges?
Yeah, before I do, I'll just mention in response to what Nadine mentioned a moment ago, in a publication that's going to come out soon, Richard Boris and another researcher he's working with has looked at the whole question of out-migration, and he's produced a few tables that show from 71 to 2016. And of course, the level of out-migration isn't what it was in the 70s and 80s when it was quite a disaster for English-speaking Quebecers. It's nonetheless case that the net migration number, those who come, those who leave, has always been negative for Quebec's English-speaking community in every census period since 1971. So even though we're only talking about 5,000 to 15,000 people per 5 years, it does represent a certain number. And we also know that those with the, it continues to be the case that those who have the most prospects are likely to pursue them elsewhere. So there are highly educated groups leaving, and there's something of a left behind community, especially in some regions where people have lower and lower educational attainment of those who still remain in Quebec. So that's obviously troubling for future vitality. And the more that we can continue to reflect on and research those questions, the better. On the question of learning difficulties, it would be interesting, and I think this data came out sort of while this project was underway, but the Institut de Statistique du Québec conducted what they call the ECDEM, Enquête Québécois pour le développement des enfants à la maternelle. So it takes all of the kids in kindergarten, 100% of them across the province of Quebec, and does quite a battery of questions about various dimensions in which they may experience learning difficulties. And so these are 5-year-old kids. What we see is that the English mother tongue kids are half again as likely as their equivalent Francophone to show one or more learning delays. So that means, that the 5-year-olds start out at something of a disadvantage, but it's interesting to put that data point together with the proportion of kids who graduate successfully from the English learning system, as opposed to the dropout rate, where in fact the English system has a better report, as was mentioned here, than the French system. So it's kind of, one could take it as, well, there's a real challenge and a problem, but somehow the system seems to be succeeding, starting out with a deficit situation and ending up at the end of this sort of 11-year run with the success. So it's kind of interesting to note in that regard too.
Interesting. Another question, Andréanne asks if there was any connection or correlation between the briefs and implications associated with our First Nation communities that may be evolving or identifying their own needs associated with specific First Nation cultures. Some of our English speakers are also our First Nations peoples.
We didn't write anything on that. It wasn't given as part of the mandate. However, I do think that the community learning centers, as they worked across the province, became one of the things that became very apparent was that a lot of the kids that are in the English school sector are First Nations. It's under-recognized, and they've done some pretty amazing work for helping schools recognize these kids, give them a voice. And I think maybe, again, if we had a chair for English Ed, these could be critical issues that people could be doing master's degrees on or PhDs. They're great topics for young students that come out of those communities themselves, and could possibly be the best people to speak to it, to research it.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. We're coming down to the end. And now I'm going to pass, I want to thank Patricia and Nadine, and I'm going to pass it over to Lorraine.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lorraine O'Donnell, and I help run the Quebec English-speaking Communities Research Network. So I wanted to say some thanks. Patricia, you took the words out of my mouth, but I just want to echo your words about Nadine Ciamarra, who saw this project from inception to completion to presentation. She finished her graduate diploma, she got full-time work, and she stuck it out. Thank you, Nadine. And of course to Patricia for your expertise and wonderful support. Thank you too to Debbie for taking on the moderation of this very complex event. It's much appreciated. Production of these briefs was funded by the Secretariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise, and we're very grateful for that. Our main sponsors for today's event, as already mentioned, are the Secretariat, as well as Department of Canadian Heritage, and QUESCREN is also grateful to our regular funders, the CIRLM and Concordia University. And I wanted to thank people from all of these funding organizations who are here for today's event. And finally, to all the people who attended and provided insights, expertise, questions, we recognize that this is a very important topic that engages our communities and supporters of our communities, and we look forward to seeing you at other QUESCREN Lunch and Learn events like this. Thank you very much.